In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Greater Tuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
And today we are talking about the 12th book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, which is Witches Abroad. This was published in 1991. Kathy, what's the synopsis?
A witch in Lanka prepares for death by sending her wand to Magrat. Meanwhile, a witch obsessed with mirrors watches from the distant city of Genua. When Magrat inherits the title of godmother and has to travel for the role, she can't stop elder witches Nanny Og and Granny Weatherwax from joining her. The trio spread chaos, bad pronunciation, and proper respect for witches across half a continent, encountering a lot of stories on their way. In Genua, the population are terrorised by rulers who force people into stereotypes and make happiness mandatory. Swamp Witch Mrs. Gogol looks out for the new arrivals to aid her fight to free the city. Meanwhile, Granny's recent aversion to mirrors brings up a family secret.
Excellent. So, your first impressions?
I liked it. I've said before, the Witch series is one of my favourites. And I had read this, I think, a few times. So, yeah, I still liked it. As ever, you forget some bits go vague, so there's still stuff to interest you. A lot of the references in this are things people mostly know, because it's mostly fairy tales and sort of famous stories. So I think most it was just the extra Lord of the Rings stuff I got this time, because I hadn't read much Lord of the Rings I've only read a bit when I was younger. But yeah, no, I thought it was generally good. It's another travel-y one, which we mentioned before.
we do have a number of these to go through.
But it's not questy, it's a little bit more, I guess, kind of travelogue-ish, but it felt a little bit more, I say intentional, like it's all part of the story, not like, here's the bit where we travel between places.
Yeah.
Like, the journey was part of the wider plot, which I think some of the other travel ones, either it's been sort of zipping about odd bits, or travelling through seemed not that related to the destination.
Yeah.
So it felt like it's all tied together a bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
How are you?
I think this is, not that I dislike the Witcher series, but I don't think I've reread them as much. So while this one, I did remember more of it when I came to reading it. I couldn't have necessarily said what the plot was. But no, I liked it. We get development to the characters. The witches are a good ensemble there. Yeah, with a bit more of the disc that we see and more building of that. And I know, yes, it's a nice rounded story as well. We definitely get a beginning, middle and end, which is kind of important given the other, topics of the book. I mean, sometimes the endings can feel a bit flat. Found some of the earlier books, the ending's a bit rushed, but, we get a satisfying ending. And yes, it's definitely a story. Again, sometimes we end up with an ideas piece. So, yes, I mean, I think it's very common that we've enjoyed these books. It's very rarely that we've come out of them and gone, yeah, I didn't enjoy that. Although, kind of looking at you, Eric.
I think I have to keep maligning it every episode.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a good punching bag at the moment. So yes, I mean, it's not without the book's not without its flaws or things that we're going to discuss.
I mean, do we want to start discussing those now, or do you have anything more?
No. I think we would just slide right into.
So the thing that's notable about this one, which we notice, is it is only the second book, and it's the 12th.
Yes,
as you say, which explicitly mentions that there is a black person in it.
Yeah.
Although this one does, it seems to have quite a few.
Well, you'd hope so, but anyway. So you continue.
It's when they arrive in Genua.
I think we're going with Genua.
I think I'm just going to say it how I feel each time.
Yeah.
Because there's probably other ways of pronouncing that too. So that they're over there and Nanny Olga's gone to kind of scout things out. It's like, Nanny Olga found a friend. Her name was Mrs. Pleasant. She was a cook and she was the first black person Nanny had ever spoken to. That in itself isn't too bad because the whole point of Lanka is it's very much rural England.
Yeah.
And we are both from different parts of rural England and they're not very diverse.
I mean, certainly not back when we were there. I mean, I'd like to think it might be more diverse now, but
Hopefully.
certainly when Pratchett was writing, you'd have had swathes of the countryside.
Well, when he was writing this, we were both living in the countryside.
Well, fair point, yes.
Just thinking about, like, the school I went to, which
Well,
was
yes.
mostly villagers. So there's that. And also the fact that he's just said, oh, she's a black person. Because sometimes in books, authors will try and, like, describe someone's appearance without naming their race, which is sometimes fine, but then using food to describe people's skin tone is deeply problematic. So he's avoided that. But then there is a footnote. Racism was not a problem on the Discworld. Which one feels, okay. Because, what with trolls and dwarves and so on, speciesism was more interesting. Black and white lived in perfect harmony and ganged up on green. Now I see what he's doing, and I think in the early 90s, as a sort of fairly, I guess, liberal white guy, you can see where this is coming from. It's not like people still don't do not as well, but yeah, it's not great. So, and later on, there's a character of Ember, and describes her as being, definitely describes her as being brown, but also having like blonde hair, and says something about like, oh, in a city like Genoa, that was a perfectly reasonable. Like,
Yeah.
wait, I can't remember the exact...
I think implying biracial.
Yeah. I think the implication is that, and that, well, I know because we see her parents later and they sound like they're both black, but she has also been influenced by magic, so it's a little bit unclear. But yeah, it's the suggestion is that Genoa is quite diverse.
I mean,
and there's certainly a reasonable black population.
I mean, Genoa is supposed to be, obviously it's but it's supposed to be a stand-in for New Orleans.
Yes, yeah.
And so obviously it's got a large black community, but it's also, which seem to be the poorer side of things.
I mean, that in fairness is reflecting how things often are in Round World.
Yeah.
And not even just in the US. But I think that was the thing, when there was, what was the hurricane? Was it Katrina?
Yeah.
And the way New Orleans was affected. And again, it was a lot of the poorer neighbourhoods, which were largely black communities that were affected and just never got rebuilt and were kind of destroyed. And then I think I heard somebody talking about Paris, for example, as a place where there's quite a big black population. But if everyone shows traditional pictures of Paris, you don't sort of see that.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a very diverse city, but let's face it, it's known there are parts of the city where there are quite different,
I mean, you definitely get parts of the city which are like deprivation index and all of that, and it does tend to be where some, minority groups live, and it's not, those two things shouldn't go hand in hand, but they
do historically, and so I think it being like that makes sense. Like, he very much with Genoa has like, this is the rich middle bit and this is the kind of less salubrious bit outside, which I think we'll go into a bit more when we talk about Genoa. I think it's more just that he's saying, there wasn't racism on Discworld. It's like, well, I know you're the creator and you want to just decide that, and I guess it's a nice thing to decide. It's like, we're going to have speciesism instead. It's that thing like, we've made an allegory for something. And obviously Pratchett, there's a lot of allegory and there's a lot of looking at injustice in his work.
Yeah.
But this just feels a little awkward. It's like, Nana's only just met somebody who's black. So...
To be fair, she seems to be the type of person who'd be okay with, she embraces all people.
Well, but again, no one's ever mentioned what... Again, the other thing is, this goes back to, this is only the second time black people have been mentioned. There's one person in Colour of Magic. It doesn't say if anyone else in Kroll is black. There's just one character. The assumption, therefore, is that everyone in Lanka must be white, because Granny says that. So she's met more dwarves and trolls than black people. Ankh-Morpork, which again is, diverse modern city, changes in population, different groups coming in, and again, a very good thing for that. But is everyone we've met so far there been white? It's not been specified, so I guess we kind of have to assume they have been, unless, you get like people from class, unless it's specifically mentioned. And this is the thing, it's a lot of the default's white, so we'll mention if anyone's anything else, even in a fantasy world. And I mean, there was a book, I can't remember the name of it wasn't God Killer, but it was something like that, God War. It had the word God in it. but it was a fantasy setting. But in that, the author specifically every so often wrote that people were white, which then kind of rather said, well, if he's describing that, everyone else is probably, different.
Changed the default, yeah. It's, I suppose for our unfortunate defaults, I imagine in our mental views, it's a very white crowd scene.
I mean, we have put our pictures on BlueSky, but we are white. So,
Yes.
There's obviously probably a lot of nuance in this that we are missing. But I feel like we just kind of need to mention it because, as you said, it's a 12-book series. It's only the second time black people have been mentioned.
Going through the books, I can't remember any more significant characters.
There's Jingo.
Okay,
which everyone's from Clatch, but that strikes me as being very like Middle Eastern and maybe South Asian.
Yeah, so. but again, we don't.
And again, I mean, suppose we've had books where like Rincewind did go to Clatch. They went somewhere that seemed like it was the Middle East. It didn't mention what anyone looked like specifically, but they had Arabic sounding names, so one assumes they were brown.
Jelly Baby. It's in Egypt,
Egypt's very much like it's the North African Arabic,
famous for having lots of different colours.
But again, it's not. Yes, he doesn't mention.
And I have to say, unfortunately, cover art predominantly is all been white.
I think the thing is that, as you say, with Jelly Baby, it's a stand-in for like ancient Egypt, which is different to modern Egypt, but is also in Africa and the Middle East, like it's the country that kind of connects to. But everyone in it seems to be very British, because that's the thing Pratchett's writing from, and that's the thing he's kind of lampooning a lot of the time, is particularly Englishness, very much this kind of like Little England type attitude. And that comes up more when the witches are travelling. So the whole point is, they've decided to go on this journey, and they're kind of all foreign parts, and the point is, most of them have never left Lanka. Does say Granny Weatherwax went to Ankh-Morpork. Does kind of influence your theory, your Weatherwax theory.
Still holds through. She could have gone for any other many reasons why she could have gone to Ankh-Morpork.
Nanny kind of takes on the role of guide a little bit because she's had a son who's travelled in, it sounds like in a navy, I don't really know exactly. And she's also writing postcards home, but they've got this very kind of like, and I think Pratchett is lampooning Brits abroad.
Yes, that's what he's aiming for. That's that's the group he's hanging everything on and kind of showing how stupid it is.
It's a bit self-deprecating. They go to these other places. Granny doesn't know any language, so she has to talk to everyone. She just says it louder and louder. Nanny thinks she knows foreign, but obviously that's not really how languages work. So she just mispronounces a lot of words that are a mixture of like French and Spanish and Italian.
Yeah.
So what you get when you see them from the outside is various people being confused by these awful women who are barging in and ignoring the norms and the customs of the place and just kind of doing what they want. I mean, it's kind of play for fun, like the bit where Nanny's like, oh, here's some herb drink.
Oh, yeah,
and they drink absinthe like water. And then they ignore a bull run. The guy's trying to be like, no, you have to get inside, the bulls are running. But they can't understand him. So like, no, none today. And then, but because they're witches, the other thing is because they're witches, they can kind of bend how things are around them. So because they're like, we don't know what's happening, we're just going to carry on, this has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
It kind of then becomes that because they have the kind of force of personality to actually, stop bulls from running.
Yes, yeah,
and disrupt the whole thing.
Basically goes, no, just, and
You read about that, like people, I mean, obviously they don't have like Lanka enclaves, but it's the whole Brits abroad thing. It's like, we've gone somewhere to be sunny and go to the beach, but we're just going to make it our own thing and ignore the local customs and not get involved in anything and not be curious about it.
Fish and chips. Everyone's got to speak English, and we want everything, our way.
Yeah.
We're not going to wear sun cream because that, it's,
Now we're being, I guess, self-deprecating, but we're not named for the great reputation. It's not gotten better in the last few years, let us face it.
No.
That's a whole separate thing, but we were complaining about the things we couldn't buy recently. But I think in the course of Pratchett doing that and making fun of this very parochial, very close-minded, Little England attitude, it also kind of pulls in a lot of stereotypes from other places, though. So they go to somewhere that's obviously kind of Spain. I think there's something that's also kind of France. Oh, no, wait, is that queer? I don't know. There's definitely like a Spanishy bit. And
it's very broad strokes, kind of.
Yeah, and they're not mocking the people around them. It probably put more of a piece in the early 90s when people would just make jokes like that all the time, like in full seriousness, and he's kind of lampooning it. But now, I mean, while people kind of still do, it's less part of the general landscape of things, so it just feels a little bit like it sticks out.
Yeah.
Although then again, it would probably be a bit like watching a Lower Low.
Well, there is that as well.
Or Faulty Towers.
I mean, in some respects, though, it doesn't... There's part of it that... So they go to what is Proto-Uberwald quite early on in the journey. And what they're doing, they're barging around. You know, there's a castle where the Count lives, and the villagers all scared underneath. And
That's just from Dracula.
But it's Dracula. But that one doesn't feel as bad, because that's pure fantasy, you know.
I think we're going to get into stories. I think the stuff that's based on stories and the Dracula thing could kind of be, this is foreign people are acting oddly, but it's also Dracula.
Yeah.
And I mean, that wasn't anything to do with the wider plot, but it is in there. So, and as you say, it is Proto-Uberwald. You know, they go to a place that's clearly been haunted by a vampire, but they don't know everyone's scared, and then they end up accidentally killing the bat. No, they
knock him off the.
They keep opening the because everyone's like, you have to close the shutters, keep it closed, and they're like, no, we're just going to open them. It's fine. And then they keep knocking the bat, and then Grieber gets them.
Yeah.
And then the people are really happy when they leave, so they help those people.
So that's
But yes, and again, as you say, the Uberwald isn't mentioned, but that clearly is where they were.
Yes, and in fact, if you look at the Discworld map, it's direct line,
which was made sometime later using this information.
But
so that's. So I mean, it is a good book. There's just stuff like that in there, and again, some of the stuff with Genua, because there's lots about voodoo. You know, you've got a character that is a witch, but it does use the word voodoo that she's doing. But I feel like the understanding of voodoo in that is very much a kind of touristy voodoo that is sold to white people. I mean, there's a bit of stuff about voodoo dolls, which are actually more based on European witchcraft, like poppets, but that's kind of mentioned a bit. But there's stuff about gods.
But they do mention it as it actually is mentioned as a puppet, rather than being.
Yeah, so there's the fact that the witches are actually familiar with that because, again, what we in the West and in European traditions tend to think of as voodoo dolls is actually, it's very much a European magic tradition. So I don't think he kind of explains that, but it's kind of there if you know, I guess. Yeah. But also stuff about the cooking, because again, that's the other thing, foreign food.
Yes.
It's a whole, as you say, a lot of Brits will go abroad and just eat British food.
Much like Americans and McDonald's, they will just, Brits will just want the bait, they don't want to.
I mean, it varies again. We're sort of stereotyping our own selves, but I guess we're allowed, and it probably is fair.
We're pointing out that the type of people that practice lampooning, that's what they would do. I mean,
But then he is making a lot of jokes about the food, which is very clearly based on Cajun stuff.
Yes.
And a lot of this food is coming out of a swamp, and it's kind of part there's lots of stuff about how Geneva is full of cooks, and there's lots of stuff about kitchens and cookery. And so on the one hand, it sort of seems like there's respect for it, and it's part of the magic. But on the other hand, there is a lot of we're not touching that.
Yeah.
Which I do say as someone who is a fairly unadventurous eater for various reasons of my own. Yeah, I don't try and denigrate other stuff. I just have to be a bit cautious. But yeah, so anyway, I guess that's the bit that we found a bit problematic. So shall we go into some of the other stuff?
Well, yeah, and as I say, it's meant in good faith.
Well, that's the thing, he's trying to almost use it, I think, to make a point
and highlight it.
I think it feels a bit different now.
And I think, we're coming at it many years later.
I think it feels a bit like if someone's making a point about how you shouldn't make mother-in-law jokes, we'd all be a bit like, well, yeah, no, that's very old-fashioned. So the next thing is we should mention a little bit of stories.
Yes, there's a lot of stories in this. It is a story in a story in a story. In some respects, we have many stories.
Story full of stories.
Yes. But so he's taking, because the idea is...
This is the other part of their travels, the bit where they're not being bumbling.
They're running
Brit standards abroad.
They're running into stories. So the idea of...
It's fairy tales.
Well, it's not just fairy tales. So
it's mostly fairy tales.
Yeah, but we've got stories repeating, stories...
Stories being set up.
Yes.
So, I mean, we mentioned the vampire thing, which feels less part of that. That feels like a situation they came into. But then they wander into... Well, there's a place where a girl with a red hood is going to see Grandma.
Yes.
And then there's a woodcutter, and then they go to Grandma's house, and it's all messy, and Grandma just isn't sure what she's doing. Well, it's interesting actually so fairy tales is interesting named in English because most of them don't have fairies in.
No.
It's really only Sleeping Beauty that does.
They have a lot of witches in.
Well, this is the thing. So part of this is that Magrat has been given the role of godmother by a witch from Lanka who actually travelled a lot as a godmother and did that work. And you'd normally think fairy godmother, but it's like they've replaced fairies with witches. But actually the grandmother in the Red Riding Hood bit, they say, oh, we're fairies. There's a couple of times they say, oh, we're fairies.
Yeah.
Because Nanny Oggs is like fairy hedgehog.
Yeah.
And it is this weird kind of thing where they've like... Because obviously usually witches are the bad ones and fairies are the good ones. And there's lots of about good and bad, but it's kind of more witches are focused and fairies are mentioned, but as something that you might say you are, but isn't real. Yeah. And again, the godmother is very much a witch role. They've not mentioned fairies so much. No. And in fact, when somebody does mention fairies to the grandmother, she keeps trying to give them sources of milk, because of course that's the old tradition. But yes, basically a weird wolf creature appears, but it very pathetic. It's basically a very skinny wolf because it doesn't eat much, and it's sort of walking around and kind of half talking. And Granny gets super mad because clearly someone's messed with it.
Yeah, they're kind of forcing a character, someone to be a character.
She said they forced. It's not even a werewolf. It's forced a wolf to think it's a human, and there's more of this later, forcing things to be other things. The Three Bears mentioned as well, because they find these woodcutters and then they see the deplorable state of the poor grandmother's cottage and they're like, you're going to go help this old lady now. And yeah, because they're like, well, you just let the thing wander around. And this is where you get the thing where it's a bit like the form of help, because they're like, no, this thing, like, it asks them to die.
Yeah.
And because it lives in such torturous existence. So, I mean, women's going to the grim part of fairy tales. Yeah. So I realised the pun just before I said it. But they do mention, there are 3 bears that lived in a cottage nearby.
Yeah.
The whole thing is kind of Cinderella with the godmothers. They go to that castle where there's all the stuff growing, and everyone's all dusty and asleep, and they kind of break in. And then when they finally wake someone up, everyone recognises Granny and is really mad at her, and they're like, what's happening? So that's like foreshadowing. And then did you want to do there's Lord of the Rings.
So there's, at the start, to get into
Dwarf
mines, they do. There's invisible runes, which
you can buy from a wizard.
Yeah, it's amazing. I don't know if they don't even a wizard. I'll sell anyone who wants some invisible runes written. Tap me up. Guaranteed.
You work in a library.
Exactly, 100% invisible runes. So obviously, and that's a top. And then we get a Gollum reference later,
which I didn't get the first time.
Yes, it's a bit of a. But
that feels less like an orchestrated one though, and more like practice. Just a bit like, I'm going to put some Tolkien references in. They're travelling through a mine.
I think it's because the start he's talking about stories, and that they're the ideas that they've evolved. Weak stories die out, the stronger survive, but they keep getting bigger and bigger by retelling.
Yeah.
So this is about the stronger stories. So we've got throughout these, we've got round world stories. These aren't Discworld stories. These are round world stories told within.
I think the point is they are stories because Discworld runs on stories. So they have those, but it's just that it is like, this is how the story goes, and witches know that, and that's how they can identify them.
But I think the reason for including sort of Tolkien within that is to show, this world, as well as being built on the fairy stories and that, is also built strongly on the Tolkien.
I mean, it was the early 90s. I think huge amount of fantasy was told. So he's probably just commenting on the milieu that he was in.
So, but it is talking about the.
I mean, the interesting thing with that is that a lot of study of kind of folklore, fairy tale, that kind of thing, the stuff we've written down, the Grimm brothers, the Perrault stuff, is either later or like the recorded, like we were going to write things down academically, versions of stories that have been around for a long time in the oral tradition. And there are actually people who've used, I think, methods you'd use for like evolutionary biology, but applied it to stories, and they can find like how far back some of them go. I mean, I don't know how this works. I'm not an academic. or I didn't fully understand the article I read about this, but it sounded very cool. But yes, they can tell how far back some stories go, and that they've got, and there's all these categorizations of stories and types, and that, you know, stuff appears in different cultures and things like that. But yeah, some of them sort of go back really far. It's that Granny starts noticing, I think that some stuff's been engineered, like somebody has interfered to make this set of things happen.
And I mean, from the sort of the way it talks about stories at the start, the idea that, and narrative causality, which is something that we, you know, we'll come across many times, that it means that a story once started takes a shape. So once you kind of set along that road, and it's an interesting idea of free will.
Yes.
Once you get within, you know.
Sorry, I listened to a podcast recently that talked about how little free will actually exists, but we'll not get into that right now.
We're not. We're looking at a storybook, story rather than reality. Once these people are, you know, set in motion, do you have free will within the story?
Well, this is the thing, and I mean, the thing we haven't mentioned. You know, we say they go travelling because Magrat, you know, she inherits a wand from a godmother witch who died and has to go travelling. But the message she leaves is she must under no account marry the prince. So it's like basically do not allow the story to happen.
Yes, the story must not come to it. It must not have its happy ending. Or it's the story happy ending.
And at that point it's like, well, if the godmother's supposed to make the happy ending happening, what are you if you're the one stopping it? Which we'll get to. Oh, the other one is, of course, what's foreshadowed by... So when they first set off to go travelling, Granny's very shocked by what the others are wearing. Because, I mean, Magrat's wearing trousers.
Yes. I mean, that is...
Like, it looks a bit like It looks a bit like maybe it's like some sort of green jumpsuit type thing, but she's basically... I mean, because you're on a broomstick, so it's quite practical, but I think it's of that generation where old ladies wanted you to wear skirts all the time, because I definitely had to wear skirts sometimes when visiting relatives.
They could see her legs.
No, they couldn't see her legs because the trousers covered them.
But the gap between the legs, there's actually legs.
Yeah, that was the thing. It's like you see her legs. Like, no, they're covered by trousers. It's like, but you can see where her legs would be. It's like, where else would they be? Again, I think it's that sort of generation of, because I do remember as a kid, who was a child who just liked to wear trousers most of the time, and obviously couldn't because of school uniforms. But then occasionally certain relatives would be a bit like, well, they like to see you in a skirt. And it's a bit like, oh... Also, she's a bit shocked because Nanny is wearing red boots, bright red boots.
Very bright red boots.
She has also bought a special travelling hat that is very reinforced and strong. So then later, it gets very black. Like, it's gotten very windy. Very windy. And then the farmhouse lands on Nanny. And all these dwarfs turn up. And they're not sure why, but they think they're supposed to sing something. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yes, it's like, we can see what you're doing here.
But it's just that the boots and the hat were mentioned at the very start of the journey, and then it's towards the end. You're like, oh, I've forgotten quite how much this was in there. So, I mean, this is the thing. Some of it you get in, you're like, oh, it's Sleeping Beauty. Why are they mad at Granny? It's clearly Little Red Riding Hood, but, you know, they've stopped the grandmother from being eaten. But then, some of it is like he's foreshadowed it for a bit, and it's kind of fun. Yeah, so it's good. Yeah, again, it's got that Pratchett thing of like, oh, there's some real deep, meaningful, interesting exploration stuff, but we're also gonna make some very funny jokes.
Yeah, we're just gonna drop a house on somebody. It's fine.
Did we want to talk about our three main characters and how they're going?
Yeah, so, you know, obviously we continue on with Magrat, Granny Weatherwax, and Nanny Og. In the green room, our conversation on a train while planning this. You can't really tell how long since Weird Sisters this is set.
No, it could be a few weeks. It could be maybe a year or so.
I mean, I would give it definitely a couple of months because so Magrat is not in a, you know, at the end of Weird Sisters you kind of presume that Magrat and Verence are going to end up.
They mention
something.
They mention Verence back home, but they sort of mention. This is the thing. Male characters not mentioned, particularly the main one is kind of Nanny Og's writing to her family, mostly her Jason, who's a blacksmith, and he also asks Magrat to like keep an eye on her, and it sounds like he's saying keep her out of trouble, but I think it's like keep other things out of the trouble of encountering her.
Yeah.
But yeah, Varence is mentioned briefly, but at one point somebody's saying something about not quite, like, kind of like he's a modern king, like he's always, like, pottering about. So it sounds a bit like Varence has had time to kind of be looking stuff up and trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
But he's not mentioned. It sort of mentions something about, like, Magrat walking out with him, like somebody else is thinking about it. But she's not thinking about him much.
No, I think the thing is that she's trying to self-improve herself.
She's finding herself.
Yes, and I think so. And she has, in order to do this, she has ordered some self-defense pamphlets.
Well, she's ordered general, I think. So,
some of them are definitely self-defense pamphlets.
Yeah, so perhaps it makes a good point early on. Wisdom is one of the few things that looks bigger the further away it is, which is that thing where people seek wisdom from elsewhere, so they're not going to look at where they are. They're going to so she's ordered pamphlets that seem to be about enlightenment, and again, it's that kind of stereotypical kind of like
from Lobsam Dibbler.
Yeah, so we know it's probably a scam because the word Dibbler is there, but the point is, and again, it's in a footnote. No, the idea is that people will travel to seek wisdom somewhere else. And again, the thing about wisdom looks bigger the further away it is. But it also mentions in a footnote the way of Mrs. Cosmopolite, and it mentions that various robed monks from the mountains will go down to Ankh-Morpork and try and listen to the wisdom of Mrs. Cosmopolite, who I assume is the wardrobe lady from Moving Pictures.
Yes.
And it sounds like she's mostly waving her broom at them, at which point I kind of pictured Nora Batty from Last Summer Wine. But yes, just the idea that, if Western style people are sort of looking to somewhere that's the kind of Tibet style part of the Discworld, more on which in later books, then are people
where are they looking?
Yeah, where are they looking? Or they're going to listen to an old lady. And again, it's one of those footnotes. So you're like, this becomes the whole thing later, yes. Which is the fun of reading these through in order.
Yeah, but anyway, in this, I think the fact that she would have had to have ordered and got the pamphlets, I think we're looking at a couple of months is kind of...
That's true.
But I mean, it could have been longer, but I don't,
It sounds a bit like Magrat's trying to figure out where she is. And mostly in this book, it feels like it's about as a witch and as somebody who's part of this group with these older women, which we saw in the previous book as well. Again, it doesn't mention Varence, but there is some stuff that also feels a bit like a sort of feminist idea, but sort of like a being your own person type thing. And there's this whole thing where Granny will not understand that because she can't understand finding herself because...
She already knows exactly who she is.
Yeah. It's like, what? She's here.
That's evidenced by the end of the book.
Well, I was going to get to that. But the other thing with Magrat is that she's misunderstanding Granny. So part of the thing is that the witch who died was Desiderata, who'd been a godmother. She'd also travelled a lot as part of that work. So she was one of the more, I guess, internationally minded people in Lanka. And she actually wants them all go to Genua, so she writes in a note that under no circumstances is Magrat let those two old biddies interfere because she is very smart and she knows they will find the letter and she knows they will insist on going. So yeah, she kind of placed them all from beyond the grave, because that's the thing being witch, you can prepare for death coming. So Magrat resents them being there because she feels a bit like she wasn't strong enough to go. At one point she actually thinks, she shouldn't have told them not to come. Did she not know what they were like? And it's like, yeah. But Magrat, in this, I feel like Nanny Ogg's very much the kind of peacemaker, bridging character. Like, she's mostly there for the gags about foreign parts and writing the postcards. You get a bit of, like, things from her point of view. So it will summarise what happened when they're in a place.
You get a cover, you might not even see, we might not get any interaction.
She'll just quickly describe something and it gives you enough of flavour to know, like, okay, they terrorised another place.
Yes.
But she's kind of there keeping the peace. I mean, without her, they probably wouldn't have got anywhere because she's the one who's willing to go up to people and babble at them in some sort of weird thing where she calls somebody Garcon or just badly mispronounces. It's like just writing the most English pronunciation of various vaguely familiar phrases from mostly French and Spanish. Although some of them I was looking at, like, I'm not even quite sure what this is a reference to.
It's foreign. It's fine.
Yeah. But she's the one who's very much,
she's the people person.
She's the people person, but she's also keeping the peace. So at various points, Magrat complains about Granny. She's like, she's not helping people. Everything she does is tricks. She's not using real magic. And Nanny, who's known Granny forever and... Well, like the help she offers is different. And because I think Magrat's sort of thinking, because there's the thing, Magrat has the wand, but it only makes pumpkins.
Yes.
It's set on the pumpkin set. But she's thinking, oh, you can grant wishes as long as they're pumpkin-based. So she's sort of thinking what good I could do. And Nanny's trying to be a bit like, but if you just grant wishes for people, but Margaret doesn't get it. But then throughout the book, everything she thinks Nanny's doing, and Nanny says, oh, you don't do this, you don't... Granny says, you don't do this, you don't do that. And then later, Nanny's a bit like... Margaret will point out she's being hypocritical, and Nanny's a bit like, you have to understand, when Esme says something about people, she doesn't mean herself. But it's interesting because it sort of shows that Margaret's still trying to understand the role of a witch. And it's like, yeah, they help out in the community, they help out with the stuff they're doing, but there's also not real magic. But then Granny does sometimes, but it's that she kind of holds that power. And there's a point when she says, oh, you can't just... She explicitly says you can't mess with fire without getting burnt.
Yes.
And then later on, somebody tries to set fire to a voodoo doll, and it does not go well for them.
No.
But of course, that's the whole thing that you get where it's, if the voodoo doll and her are connected. No, that's it. They're frightened to hit the voodoo doll, and she says, oh, there's a connection between us.
Yeah.
And she says she doesn't believe that they do. That's it. And then she sticks her hand in a fire.
Yeah.
And the voodoo, like, she basically reverses the voodoo doll. Yeah. Yes. Granny does a lot of reversing things in things.
I think with Margaret and Granny, they're both... Margaret, obviously, even from Weird Sisters, she has a very new age to magic. She feels that there's certain trappings that go with not just the pointy hat, crystals, and, you have to do magic with real magic is done with certain trappings. Whereas Granny kind of knows that you don't need that for real magic.
Yeah.
And often real magic is not actually magic at all.
It's headology.
Yeah. And I think Margaret, I don't know, it kind of feels
I think she resents it a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, Margaret, because there's that new agey thing. Although I feel like there's less of that in this one. Well,
I don't know, the kind of seeking yourself and that's the
thing. It's become more turned inwards. Yeah. So before it's like the occult jewelry and stuff like that. Although partly they're travelling and they keep getting wet and losing things, yes. But. Yes, it's that Margaret's turned that new age stuff more on herself. So she's trying to find herself and she's seeking wisdom. Again, it's the whole wisdom seeking but far away thing. But I think as part of that, she has a certain resentment, kind of for both of them, because they are dreadful old biddies. And
just different sides of the coin.
Well, yeah, but Margaret, I think, still finding her place, and I think she's also resentful that she a person who has so much uncertainty about herself, and I think is in a situation where she realises her life could change quite soon, but wants to make sure she's true to herself and who is that, and exploring herself. And again, I think she's only in her early 20s.
Yeah, she's not that.
So that's not so unusual, even in a time when people took adult responsibilities on much younger. And I think she resents that she's got these two such strong personalities of people who are firm in who they are, and this is always who they are, and they will not, that's what that is. And they do it in different ways, but that is absolutely both of them.
Oh God, yeah.
And it's part of the biddiness, I think.
Yes, with Granny Weatherwax famously, it's obviously who she is and everyone. But Nanny Ogg is also,
Oh, absolutely.
She knows
she's always Nanny Ogg, yeah.
She's happy-go-lucky, friendly, outgoing, family orientated, and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, her family orientated, as long as they're doing what she tells them to do, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's kind of matriarchal.
Well, there was something about her becoming uninterested in being a proud housewife from the age her eldest daughter could hold a duster.
Yeah.
At which point you're like, I feel terrible for any woman related to her.
Yeah.
It's like, she's lovely, but you wouldn't actually want to be her relative.
Oh, no, I'm pretty certain there are some Reddit threads is discussing these type of matriarchs.
Yeah. The mother-in-law type stuff.
Yeah, those
Yeah. And then if we go into Granny, who early on sees something in the mirror she doesn't like and smashes it, and then after that is very wary of all reflective surfaces. And then, as I said, the fact that people kind of seem to recognise, oh, you again. It's like, you've never been here. Basically, she realises somebody's doing something, she's getting increasingly angry about it, making it anger everyone else's problem without explaining it, which, yeah. And then when they get to Genua, she realises that there's this thing about duality in it. So they're like, oh, there's always two godmothers, which isn't actually how any of the fairy stories go.
It's usually three.
No, what? There's the three good fairies in...
Oh, good fairies, yeah.
In Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, no, I messed that one up.
And the three wise men, but that's a whole different thing.
That's a whole different thing, yeah. No, yes, okay, yes.
Yes, but I think it's saying godmothers. I think it's from that idea that... I don't know, neither of us have been, like, baptised or christened, but I think quite often you'll have, like, two godparents of the same gender and then, like, one, although I think usually actually it's godmother and godfather, I'm not sure, but there's some sort of thing just there's always two godmothers, and I couldn't quite figure out where that was from. But I think it might, again, be that duality I mentioned before of, like, the bad witch and the good fairy. The point is, there's a good one and there's a bad one. I think it's because they've conflated witches, fairies and godmothers in
Yeah,
this.
it's a bit of a combination of...
Yeah. And it's all about who's the good, who's the bad. And basically what she reveals before the end confrontation is that the terrifying woman who's taken over Genua and is enforcing stereotypes at spear point, and everyone has to be jolly all the time. And
yes,
it's like that Doctor Who episode where that robot makes you smile.
It's a Disney... It's like living in Disney World.
But... like, if all the characters were also armed guards.
Yes. It doesn't seem like it's fun place.
Yeah, it's magical and everyone's happy, but only on the surface. But yeah, so she reveals that the witch taking over is, in fact, her sister, Lily Weatherwax, which is a bit of a revelation to everyone. And they obviously look incredibly similar. But yes, Lily is the older sister, who I think was like a teenager when when Esme and Gaither were kids. Like quite young, because that's why Nanny Ogg doesn't seem to specifically remember her, although I'm sure, being the rumour monger she is, she knew there was some stuff like this, because at one point she does think, magic runs strong in the Weatherwax family. And sort of ends up with this thing of she's going up against her sister. And you do get... So she's called Lilith most of the way through, and you do get the viewpoint of Lilith, the other godmother, who is the good one. Yes. And she's all in white. And she's making everyone's dreams come true. And she's made everything happy. And the girl will marry the prince.
And I think
except he's called the Duck.
Which
it's the Duke, but yeah.
But I think we're getting to... I mean, that's the whole thing of... Yes, she is making everyone happy... But can happiness be really... Well,
this thing is, it's not happiness. It's just the surface level. So the thing with Lilith is she does a lot of mirror magic.
Yes.
So she uses the reflections in the mirror that's kind of like, because if you're between two mirrors, and again, there's a thing about not being between two mirrors in the book. If you're between two mirrors, obviously you get a reflection that goes on to infinity. And the idea is that she uses that as a power multiplier. I think the most telling phrase is this one for fairly early on. It goes, Lilith held up a mirror to life and chipped all the bits off life that didn't fit. It's all surface. It's all image.
Yeah.
The cook has to be jolly and chubby. The toy maker has to whistle all day. Yeah. It's like, but I can't whistle. It's like, well, then you can't be a toy maker.
Yeah.
And we're going to, did they execute him or just throw him in prison? I don't know. But
there were certainly some.
They cast loads of people out into the swamps, didn't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, and he's like, but I just make toys. Like, no, you have to whistle.
Yes.
And it's just enforcing this. And again, the whole thing with like the wolf person and those bears that get mentioned. There's been a coup. The old Baron was sort of killed. And then there's this guy called, it's kind of like the Prince, but he's called the Duke, except it's duck, because it's like the French version. But then they keep saying like duck, like the bird. But the point is that he's not a man, he's a frog that's been turned into a man, which also then ties into the Frog Prince thing, which is interesting because this was many years before Disney even did the Frog Princess.
There is that.
Which is also the Frog Prince... Yes. New Orleans.
Yeah.
Which when I watched it, I was like, it's like a Discworld thing, but incredibly different than actually Disney.
Yeah. But I mean, it's that. But the thing about Lilith making everyone be happy again, it's free will again. She's by she's taking away the free will of you are the toy maker, therefore you must do X, Y, Z. You are the you have no free will to follow your passions or not to whistle.
Everything has to be what she says it is and what it looks like, and that's the thing that's important. Not it's what things are. And again, there's always the very popular quote from Carpe Jugulum that people use for Granny Weatherwax, but an early version of it's absolutely here when Granny, Esme, says to Lily, you shouldn't treat people like they was characters, like they was things.
Yeah.
Everyone always does the Carpe Jugulum quote later, which obviously we'll get to when that comes up, but this is where it starts.
Yes.
And Granny is more and more furious because she describes what they've travelled through as practice. Clearly, Lily was figuring out how to shape stories, how to make these things happen.
How to make it work in the...
Yeah.
And
then she used it to take over a whole city, because the whole thing's kind of supposed to be, Cinderella.
Yeah. But obviously, doesn't care less what happens to the people that she's making to be happy. She just thinks, oh, everyone's happy. It's like,
because what looked like, again, she chipped away all the bits of life that didn't fit. It doesn't fit the picture. Get rid of it, which I think is interesting now, because a lot of stuff is so image focused, and also we're in an age where images can be so manipulated incredibly easily. Like, we've got to the point where like photos aren't witness things anymore, because you can just take stuff out on your phone, and like anything that doesn't fit, like think about filters and people always making themselves look good. It's very social media, but early night. That's how Lily lived. All these mirrors. It just feels like it's still so resonant in some ways.
But and I think it's interesting that she thinks she's the good one.
This is the thing.
She's of all the goods that she's done. And I don't really think she's thinking she's the good good godmother, but she does definitely think she's the good one out of her and Esme.
Well, no, this thing, Lily and Esme both think they're the good one, and that made me think of sisters and witches and godmothers.
Yes,
because the good witch, the bad witch, the good and bad godmothers, because that's the thing. I think Lily was a bit like, oh, the other godmother was a bad one, she wore black and I wear white. Like that's very, very, well, black and white morality signs from like film and stuff. But also sisters. Oh, so I forgot how the end was going to go, the end confrontation. Like, clearly the confrontation was coming, but I will say quite a few of these books end up with Granny Weatherwax facing off against somebody very powerful, and there being a moment of like duality, light and dark, that kind of thing. So I thought it was going to be more like that, and I think I was thinking of a different one. But what it is, because Granny tells Nanny that Lily got sent away by their mother. Also, I'm sorry, Mrs. Weatherwax? Who was the person that raised these people? Good Lord. Anyway, Granny was young, just little, and her sister was a teenager. Although it sounds like they look very similar now, except that Granny, if anything, looks older. But Granny is not the person who's going to do with fripperies, and Lilith has like everything sparkling white and lives inside mirrors. So I can see it. I can see it being a lot more like, again, the filters.
Yes.
Just that she's much more considered appearances. Where I feel like Granny's, the whole thing with Granny is she wears plain black and she just ties her hair back and that's it. Well, she even says she doesn't have a bath. She just washes bits as they become available. She's not got time for that. Sorry, it's just because you've got one sister who's very like focused on femininity and performing that, and the other one who's just like practical and I don't care about aesthetics. Yeah. Granny tells Nanny that Lily was using her magic, and she was bad, so their mother cast her out. And there's stuff about her like enchanting young men and stuff, which again you couldn't ever see Granny. Although saying that, there doesn't seem to be any young men around now. And Esme is very resentful because she says, when Lilith says about how she's the good one, and Granny's like, no, I had to be the good one. And this brings up the absolutely terrifying spectre of what Granny Weatherwax would be if she didn't feel she had to be the good one.
Yes.
Like, that bit in Lord of the Rings where Galadriel has the ring, and it's just that Dark Queen bit. I feel like it'd be that, but less elfy, but like worse.
Oh God,
yeah,
yes.
Like the idea of but you can sense in this that her sister gets cast out for being bad, and so she is raised by a mother who's like, well, you're not going to be like that. You're going to be the good. And you see, Granny is so disapproving of so much stuff. Oh, red boots, trousers, not behaving the right way. Everything has to be how it should. And it's not. And she is kind of closed-minded, but not in like a cruel way. Just in like, this is what's right. And I think that's been drilled into her. So rebellious sister cast out, you're the good one now, you have to live up to this. And I mean, how old is she now? Decades of this just worn right in.
Yeah.
And then she meets Lily and she's like, you mean to tell me you didn't even have fun? She didn't even enjoy being the bad one, because Lily thought she was doing what she had to do. And again, I mean, she's ruling a place, she's the power behind the throne, so that's a bit powerful, but is it fun? She seems to feel responsibility. She's doing stuff. There doesn't seem to be any young men or men around. It doesn't
seem like it.
She seems very duty bound as well, but in a different way. And then basically she says, "No, this is for me. This is for what you put me through." And she slaps her. And you're like, oh, it's just incredibly siblings.
Yes.
It's like, oh, it's powerful stuff. And then the end bit, get the spectre of like, this is how not to be. But then both of them have spent their life so... But what happens is, so they end up going into the mirrors, and then Death's in the mirror, and he says to Lily, so we have to find the right one, because it's like a hall of mirrors. No, not the real one.
Sorry.
And so Lily runs off.
Yes.
Searching desperately. And then he goes to Esme. How do I get out of here? You have to find the real one. No hesitation. This one. And she points at herself. Yeah. Because that's the thing. The whole thing where it says earlier that Granny would not understand the concept of finding yourself, because she is always known.
Yeah.
And in some respects with Lily, it feels a bit like, did she kind of come to realization and think this is what she should have done, but she spent so long in mirrors that, like, well, which one's real?
Well, I think that's the thing, is she doesn't know where real is.
And she's the one who's so obsessed with good and bad. Like, I think, because this thing, Granny, although she's disapproving of stuff, it's not good or bad, it's just how stuff is. And that's why she gets so upset with Lily. You know, she puts a human mind into a wolf. She turns a frog into a man. She turns two snakes into two women, sisters. Yeah. That's kind of the ugly sisters. And it's messing with their natures. They are what they are. She's not angry at them because of what they do. And even if, people do things she disapproves of, it's just how they are. I mean, she disapproves of Nanny all the time, but they're very best friends.
Yeah.
So she won't do it herself, but she's got her own standards. But she's not going to change people. Again, she's not going to treat people like characters or things. No. And this is the thing. I read that. I was like, oh, this is where it starts.
Yeah, so, I think it's very formative for Granny Weatherwax. You see, perhaps, where the idea of where she could have gone if she had. I mean, we get hints of that in Weird Sisters when, talking about Black Alice and, what she did. And the idea is that Granny Weatherwax is a little push away from that kind of thing, but it's her own resolve, it's her standards, it's her
always keeping an eye on herself.
Yeah, from going full Black Alice. It's
which is also another thing of a different character in another series, but we'll get to that. So yeah, I think that's the main things we're going to talk about. Was there anything you wanted to bring up as well?
I think, there's some interesting fun bits we get throughout the book.
Yeah, I've got a few gags I've written.
We get the first appearance. I say first appearance. Well, the first transformation of Grebo into a human.
Oh yes, because at one point they're crashing the ball, aren't they? So yes, they do a confidence spell on Magrat, which
that was a bit odd.
Yeah, well, she kind of becomes incredibly arrogant.
Yes.
But yeah, they wanted to be all horse like an old woman. It's interesting. It's like they kind of take down the wall. That's the other thing with Finding Herself. It's like they take down those walls for a bit, but then Magrat reverts. But I feel like she got a sense that she didn't kind of like who she was being then.
Fair enough. I didn't like who she was either. It didn't.
But but then and then they do that funny thing where there's people who are the same size as them, so they kind of basically steal their clothes.
The traditional, if you need guards uniforms, you find two people that and in this you get
noble women.
Yeah, noble women. Is I think at one point and basically one of them walks around the corner, sees Granny and gets sized up by her. Literally, it's like. But yeah, we get Grebo. So they transform Grebo into a human, which is an interesting one because obviously we've had lots of. In this, we've got lots of animals being transformed into humans,
and it's supposed to be it's supposed to be monstrous.
But in this situation, the three of them doing it together, it's not.
It's meant to be temporary,
but also it's not. It's Grebo in the shape of a human.
They've not done anything to his mind.
It's not. You have to behave. I mean, obviously he is behaving more as a human, but he's also he's behaving as a human cat.
Yes.
So late at points he literally goes and curls up and gets a saucer of milk from the kitchen, goes and curls up in front of a fire. He's allowed to be himself. Just as with a change of form.
Yes. Also, there's the fact that, again, foreshadowing at various points throughout, Nanny's been a bit like, oh, he's practically human.
Yes.
Which is because she's the only one that actually likes Grebo because he's horrible as a cat, but as a human, he seems to be incredibly hunky. Like
the women, he does get a lot of action in there.
Well, he kind of doesn't quite get. Yeah. But no, I think the idea is that everyone's about like they transform and it's like, oh, it's like incredibly hot now, which is interesting because I mean, Pratchett, he writes strong female characters. I don't think he's quite got the female gaze, but he's kind of close enough to be a bit like, this guy's...
In some respect, is that also just confidence? It's like...
Well, I think that's part of it. Grebo has no... Yeah.
Grebo knows who they are, whether they're in whether they're a cat.
He's definitely very male. It's a whole thing.
Yes. But whether they're a cat or a human, they know who they are.
I think he's just confused by the shape of the human thing, and also that it doesn't quite work the same way as it does with, like, lady cats, and it's a bit confused. The other first appearance we get, after only being mentioned in the footnote, is Casanunda.
Yes.
Who is the disc's second greatest lover, and is a dwarf, and starts to, like, flirt with Nanny Og, but then she's busy. But, she's not against it.
No. She's just got to sabotage a clock to stop, to make it...
Or to make it chime midnight, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes, so she kind of uses him to help out with that because he's got a stepladder, because he knows his way around stepladders, Casanunda. And again, it kind of reminds me of Hwell a bit, in that he's a guy who's, like, he's a dwarf, but he's nothing like dwarves. Because does this one mention the fact that dwarves don't really go in for romance, and in fact, they don't even express gender very much?
No, I think we...
It's been mentioned a bit so far, but the idea is that somebody being very flirty and sexual is not a dwarf thing. No. So again, I feel like we've got another dwarf who's not at all dwarvish, and that's why he's not living in a mine. Oh, there's a couple of gags that made me laugh quite a bit. So there's a bit early on where, because with Desiderata dying, it's that Magrat already knew her quite well and visit her quite regularly. Desiderata's house strikes me as like the decor style of well-travelled boomer. Which I'm not saying in a derogatory way, but there is definitely a style of house you go to, and it's well-travelled boomer. And I feel like if people know what I mean, they'll know what I mean. But like these people who travel load and they've got loads of stuff and they've arranged it all around the nicely decorated houses they own.
Lots of random souvenirs that they've picked up.
But it's not like a snow globe or something. Yeah. It's like, here's actually some very nice artwork and here's some stuff, and it's just I don't know, it's just I feel like Desiderata is a little bit more of a jumbled and tastefully decorated, and there are ranges to this, but it's kind of that. But the whole thing is, it says that Desiderata seems a bit odd because she's travelled so much, but Magrat, being very open-minded, as it says in the beginning, visits her, and one says something like, always eating her cooking, and then Granny Weatherwax describes that as curry in favour.
I mean, that's it.
And the other bit I like is when they're at the ball, a gentleman tries to dance with Granny Weatherwax. That's how it works at these things, and she doesn't know what to do. But his name is Colonel Moutard, which is Colonel Mustard French.
I think in that sequence it's just great because he does get a dance, but Granny leads. Yes, it's like. Of course,
yeah. Like she has to keep stamping on his feet to get him to stop trying to.
Yeah, but in some respects, it's like she's leading the dance, but it's not like a gender role reversal. It's just she's in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, she doesn't approve of like Magrat wearing trousers, but to take another idiom in, she's clearly wearing the trousers in almost every situation she's in. So. One description I quite liked was when Nanny and Magrat are trying to help Granny before they realise she's going to have to sort it out on her own with Lilith, is that Nanny and Magrat, who's not sure at this point, are described as like avenging angels after a period of lax celestial quality control. Which I thought was just like, we don't have to be told quite how they look, but yeah, I thought that was just quite a good...
So there's one character we haven't really touched on much, we mentioned, which is Mrs. Gogol, who is the Swamp Witch. It's the Louisiana... Voodoo, New Orleans kind of, she's well known and fulfills a similar role within Genoa community that the other witches fulfill in there.
Yes, well, because Genoa's been kind of taken over by Lilith's frog puppet.
Yeah, I mean, she's the resistance.
Yeah, kind of. She's living in the swamp. And she does have a zombie servant, which the other witches are a bit like, about at first. But then Bee talks to them, and then it sort of seems right. And again, there's an element of them sort of like testing each other a bit and sort of seeing, this is different. And then stuff like Mrs. Pleasant knows her, and everyone knows her, and they'll like put money in her pot, and they'll take...
There's gumbo, basically.
That's it.
It's basically, there's a big cauldron of gumbo sitting outside her tent when she's in town, and people
like at the market.
Yeah, people will take a bowl, leave a donation, not necessarily monetary, but
And then she sort of says to Mrs. Pleasance that she can see the future in the gumbo because she warned her the witches are coming and that she needs to bring them to her. And then later she said, she felt bad for misleading her. It had actually been in some jambalaya she'd made earlier. But yes, the idea is she's doing voodoo. And the stuff about her, I don't know if this is Pratchett turning it around a bit, because I don't know that much about voodoo. I'm sure I know is incredibly stereotypical and accurate. About her creating gods, so kind of like putting things out, like so putting like the hat and the cloak out to like lure a god or to kind of like create a god. So she'll put things out to kind of like be focuses of worship, which again I think Pratchett's going to explore more pretty soon in another book.
Yeah.
But I think he's taking the voodoo thing of like gods riding people, but kind of being like she's making gods to be used for certain things, because it's the whole thing with because her zombie is called Mr. Saturday, and then later he turns out to be Baron Samedi. So because obviously there's a fair bit of French because it's New Orleans Cajun stuff in there.
I think it's she's an interesting character, and it's it adds a different variety of the it's in some ways, so going back to the start of the episode when we, it's how much of that is actually just taking stereotypes and
quite a bit of it.
Hanging up on, and how much is it actually, because again, neither of us know much about the voodoo tradition. It's a broad and...
I think there's also thing that she's like the local person fighting against, and when she sees they're coming, she's like, okay, well, this is a way of solving a problem. And she's almost trying to put her daughter, as it turns out, back into power where she should be. But she wants to take on Lilith. And Granny's like, no, she's mine. Nanny is just quite pleasant. She'll be like, oh, okay, but she'll go along with it. Granny's very disapproving because she's like that with everyone. Margaret's a bit like, oh, what's this? But so they all have their reaction a bit like, oh, this is different to what we're used to. But they understand, one practitioner to another, they kind of understand.
They're on the same wave.
But when it comes to Granny going after Lily, she's like, no. But then that's the thing they have a confrontation about. And there's almost a thing a bit like, well, Granny could be the one that takes over. And Granny's like, well, I don't want to. But equally, she doesn't want them taking over and Mrs. Gogol now being the power behind the throne. She's a bit like, no, you have to just let things be as they'll be. So I think she's trying to stop it being like another different story taking over, I think somebody else getting power.
When magic defeats something, it's not really.
It's kind of the thing in Weird Sisters, wasn't it? If you're putting your power by magic, then that's what you're always answering to.
Yeah. So it's basically
it's less of a theme, but it's kind of there in this as well.
Definitely. I think that's So, but no, she's an interesting character.
She's got a hut that walks around on duck leg.
And she's got her own familiar, which is a cockerel
called Legbo, which is obviously very
and obviously does not is the only thing that can stand up to Grebo.
That's true, yeah.
Kind of make Grebo is
chicken versus cat. But...
Yeah, it's a no score draw on that one, I think. Grebo retreats to go terrify some alligators.
Yes, and didn't he scare some bulls earlier?
He scares a lot of things, just by existing. So, yes, I thought we'd just meant, because obviously she's another significant character that we didn't really touch on. She's
sort of... you can't, again, you see bits from her point of view, the same as with Lilith, so you get a sense of the differences and where they are in the thing, but the focus is still kind of the three main ones. Yeah. So they're sort of like there as she's kind of like partly an ally, but is willing to be an adversary for her own ends. Yeah.
We touched on everything we wanted to.
I think so.
Yeah, I think there's lots of great things in this book, and lots of things that again will eventually comes back to.
Yeah. It feels a bit like it lifts out the Witch's book. It's a bit because it's not in Lanka, because it's so no one's, I guess, life journey or like what they're doing in their own home. It's not quite a holiday, but at the end it sounds like they do go on a little holiday.
They go to the elephant.
Yes. It's sort of like taking out so you can kind of like have it where, we're off to one side and it's not our own location, so...
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of it, perhaps they all three of them have a bit more of an understanding of each other.
Yeah.
Perhaps...
Well, particularly, I guess, where Magrat's concerned.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But, I mean, in some respects, if you...
I feel like if you skip this one, I don't think there's anything massive you're missing.
No.
I mean, the stuff with Lily Weatherwax, like that background and that insight into Granny's character is very valuable. And yeah, as you said, I think Magrat develops quite a bit. But I feel like if you went to Lords and Ladies, it wouldn't... Like that almost feels like more of a follow-on from Weird Sisters. But I mean, but it is good.
It's not, it's just if perhaps the story aspects... Yeah, some of the aspects doesn't sound like it, you're interested in, or it
sounds like it's a bit too problematic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for some people it might.
I feel like it's not terrible, but I feel like it's not my place to say that.
No,
so,
yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I'm sure we've read worse as well, but
true.
this, yeah. So Yeah, if you enjoy the Witches books, this is definitely because you get more of the Witches. They're all
the whole thing where Granny Weatherwax ends up like hustling those guys because Nanny gets hustled and then Granny hustles them, and there's this whole thing where Nanny describes how when Esme's really scheming, she starts picking at her ear. I did have a bit of like an itchy ear while I was reading this book, so I noticed it because after Nanny mentions it and Granny does it, I was like, because I'm desperately trying not to scratch my own ear, and then she keeps it every so often just before she's going to do something that's like real, like I know what's happening and I'm in it. She'll do that. I can't remember if it's any of the other books, but just because I also had an itchy ear at that point, every time it happened, it jumped right out at me.
Yeah. It's a good little piece. You get more of the characters, and they're fun.
More of the Discworld,
and a bit of fish out of water. You know, and some of the things we'll see. I know Cassandra comes back later. We get Ubervold in a bigger thing.
Yeah, I'd say it's good.
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening. We shall be back next time, possibly via a trip to see an elephant with Small Gods, one of the standalone ones. And with that, I'll just say good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.